Okay, so the next tab is this one labeled UniInt. UniInt, again, stands for Universal Interface. And this is where you're going to find all those things that are common to all of our interfaces. So for example, one of the more useful of these is this write status to tags on shutdown. If you choose this option, and then you specify some kind of a digital state, we suggest you just keep that one. What it means is when this interface shuts down, we're going to write the word int shut into the record of that interface. And that's a lot better than the default behavior. If you don't have that selected, when the interface shuts down, you're not going to see anything that indicates the interface was shut down. So if the value were 50 when you shut the interface down, and then when you started it up the value is 100, you're going to see a straight line connected between the two unless you write this interface shutdown. So we strongly suggest that. And some other things in here are simply those bells and whistles that we have added, to the UniInt standard over the years. And at different points in this class, we're going to come back to some of these. We'll talk about performance points, we'll talk about health points, things like that. We're going to come back to some of these, but there is such a wealth of options here. Again, the best reference to all this is go out to this UniInt document and take a look at all the different switches. This is where you would find this described in great detail. And again, that's the name of the manual, this UniInt Interface Manual. Now I want to go back to this first screen here and just describe and then demonstrate this. Again, this is going to be, when it's selected, it's going to have the effect of writing a shutdown, a notification, that int shut, into the archive for all the tags collected by this interface when the interface shuts down. Now almost all of our other interfaces will go ahead and accept when you set this setting right here, and we'll go ahead and do as we described. But this one's a little different. The OPC interface is actually going to be setting that in the Interface Specific tab. Now we haven't looked at this yet, but every interface has one of these. A little tab gets added when you install the interface that is specific to that interface. And in this case, what I'm looking for is this data handling section in there. That's where we're going to set it for this. We're going to say we're going to write status to tags on shutdown, and we're going to choose interface shutdown. So having done that, now I'll go ahead and stop or save my interface. We're going to be warned again. I think I've had that warning enough. I know I'm going to have to stop and restart. I still have to stop and restart one more time after this because, see, now that I've stopped, when I restart, now it's going to load this switch for the first time. So it's the next time I stop the interface that we're going to write that shutdown. I'll stop the interface. I've waited a few seconds. I'll start it up again. And let's take a look at the big finish here. And this is what I was hoping to see. As you can see, right now the status of that is interface shutdown. Okay, and now it's going back to collecting data. And if I drop a trend cursor, we can see exactly when that happened. See, right at this point, it's telling us that that value was interface shutdown. So that's how you do it with the OPC interface. Remember, most of your interfaces, you're going to be doing this over here on the UniInt section. But we do strongly recommend you make use of that because, as you can see, the end result is now instead of just getting this where we connect the dots, you get something that's genuinely more information for people to use. Now, while we're talking about this, I want to point out that it's also possible to write a shutdown when the Pi server itself shuts down. And to show you that, I need to go over to the point configuration and show you. Let's look at a tale of two tags here. This Pi tag, this is that pump test or pump speed test. This is getting data from the OPC interface. That's being collected on a foreign node, on a remote interface node. And if you take a look at this section called Archive, you'll notice there's an option here called Shutdown, and that's turned off, and that's proper. Now for a tag whose values are collected on a remote node, you don't want to write the word shutdown when the Pi server shuts down because that's not going to affect the data that's being buffered out on that foreign node. No, instead we set that to off. Now this tag right here, CDT158, it's actually gathered on the Pi server. And it could be, well, in this case, it's a random interface tag, but it could be a calculated tag or some other tag whose values are being determined by the interface by the Pi server. In that event, what you want is the word shutdown to be turned on, or the shutdown setting to be turned on. And that way, when the Pi server shuts down, we will see a value written to the archive for that tag. And you'll see an example of that right here. Let me go ahead and change this back to 2 hours. I'll show you what the difference looks like between these two tags. Yeah, this is showing two tags. This is the pump speed tag. That's the one for whom shutdown is not set. This tag here, this is that CDT158. And if you look at this, it actually has written the word shutdown. Yeah, you see it over on the corner there, shutdown. It happened at 254. If I were to look at 254 for that same period for this tag, you won't see any shutdown. There was no shutdown written for that one because shutdown was not set on for that tag. There's a nice example from the class documentation that explains what we're going after here. What we're looking for is, for this period of time when the server's shut down, any tags like this red tag right here, whose values are collected on the server, that should write a shutdown. And then for the blue tag here, that tag is not collected on a server, that's on an interface node, and that should continue to have data without the word shutdown written. If you were to turn shutdown on, you'd actually see the little shutdown markers in these tags, so don't make that mistake. And then of course when the interface shuts down, when that shuts down, we do want interface shutdown to be written here. So that's the behavior we're looking for from both of these different configuration choices. Okay, so back to this interface specific tab here. You'll notice that for the OPC interface, boy, I tell you, did we go to town on this. I mean, look at all the different switches here. There are a huge amount of switches, and of course it's because OPC is a huge standard that is supported by lots of different vendors, and of course that all these different vendors have different favorite features that need to be supported, etc. And so we're supporting those. Now, the best place to find documentation on each of these, like when we start talking about these advanced options within OPC, the best place to find out about that is to go into the interface documentation. This is the documentation that is deposited into the directory that contains the interface itself. You'll find this interface manual there. That's where you'll find more information about those interface specific switches. We don't have a lot to say about them in this class because there are hundreds of interfaces, and each of those interfaces has many interface specific switches. Now, we sometimes have new additional parameters that are not implemented in ICU but are supported by the interface. So for example, let's say we've added some new switch, and that switch is slash ABC equals temporary, or something like that. This would be an example of making use of the additional parameters field for those things that are not yet covered in the things that are specific here. So it's essentially a way of adding things to the startup for this interface that are not currently covered by what we've done in ICU. Now, next up, there's a service tab. The service tab is where we do all the things that are associated with running this interface as a service. Now, if you're new to Windows System Management, just to give you a real quick idea of it, within Windows, you can run applications as services, which means they continue to run even if you log off the machine. And it's something that can be set up so that it automatically starts up every time you start the operating system. You can give it specific dependencies. So for example, I've made this interface dependent on PyBuffSS. That really affects the order in which these things are started up. We're going to start up PyBuffSS, that buffering system, before we start up this OPC interface. There's other things associated with this, like how is it going to handle security? Is it logging on as the local administrator or as a named user? Now, all of these things are controlled within the service applet. I can, if this were not running right now, I'd be able to remove this as a service and add it if it's not already added, etc. So this is where we handle those kind of service options. Now, normally, when you install an interface, it's installed properly as a service. You don't have to worry about this stuff. But if you do need to make changes, this is where you can do that. Now next we have this IO rate section. This allows you to create what we call IO rates tags. An IO rate tag It's a long-standing feature of Pi. It allows you to create a tag that's stored in Pi whose value is going to be the number of events per minute that are being sent by this interface. And this is going to report it in terms of 10-minute averages. So I'll go ahead and create this. This is going to be the name of it. As you can see, it's just generating a name there, but you can modify that if you prefer. I'll go ahead and create it. At this point, I'll go ahead and choose Apply. This is going to go ahead and make that basically a part of the system now. Well, lastly, we have this Interface Status tab. And this is something that, to be frank, we're going to ignore it in this class. We teach it in our System Manager 2 class. You'll find all about it in the documentation. If you're using our Interface Status utility, you're going to need to work with this. Now, this has been a very long video that covers a lot of ground. What I suggest you do, if you're having trouble with an interface, is concentrate on the specific interface switches, those that are specific to that interface. And again, go out to your interface documentation to determine what those switches should be set to and what are the general recommendations for those switches.